The day had started with the kind of simple, unadulterated joy that a father lives for. My son, Leo, was turning 17. We had a tradition, he and I. Every year on his birthday, I'd take the day off from my logistics firm and we'd spend it at the old auto shop I still kept as a hobby. This year was special. For the past 6 months, we had poured our hearts, our sweat, and a fair amount of grease into restoring a 1988 Ford Bronco. It was a beautiful, rugged machine, the color of a midnight sky, and it was his. We spent the morning giving it a final polish until the chrome gleamed under the shop lights. The look on his face when I handed him the keys, a mixture of disbelief and pure, uncontainable happiness, was a memory I would treasure for the rest of my life. "Go on, son," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Take her for a spin. Just be back by 5. Your mother has a whole party planned." He drove home, his smile a mile wide, and parked the Bronco in the guest spot in front of our house. It was a point of pride, wanting the neighbors to see his new ride. He ran inside to get ready for his party, leaving the gleaming symbol of his newfound freedom sitting proudly at the curb. That was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. At 4:30, my wife Sarah called me, her voice frantic. "Michael, you need to come home, now. It's the Bronco. It's gone." I broke every speed limit getting back to our subdivision, Willow Creek. I found my son standing on the empty curb where his truck had been, his shoulders slumped, his face pale with shock. A group of neighbors were gathered, whispering amongst themselves. My wife was in a heated, tearful argument with a woman I knew all too well, Mrs. Davenport, the self-appointed queen of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. "There was nothing I could do," Mrs. Davenport was saying, her voice sharp and unapologetic. "It was in a guest spot for more than 4 hours without a guest pass. The rules are perfectly clear." My blood ran cold. "You towed my son's truck?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet as I walked up to her. "On his 17th birthday?" She turned to me, her expression a mask of condescending pity. "Michael, I am sorry for the timing, but the integrity of our community rests on the consistent application of our bylaws. No exceptions. We have a contract with Talon Towing. They do sweeps every afternoon." Leo looked at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I was only gone for an hour and a half, Dad," he whispered, his voice cracking. "She's lying. She saw me park it. She was watching from her window." And in that moment, I saw the whole ugly picture. This wasn't about a rule. This was a power play. Mrs. Davenport, a woman who thrived on enforcing petty regulations, had seen an opportunity to make a point, and she had chosen my son's happiest day to do it. She had deliberately and maliciously orchestrated this to cause our family the maximum amount of pain and humiliation. She had weaponized a tow truck to ruin a boy's 17th birthday. I looked at my heartbroken son, then at this smug, tyrannical woman. A cold, quiet rage began to build inside me, a controlled burn that sharpened my focus to a razor's edge. She had made a grave error in judgment. She thought she was just a resident, a woman to be trifled with. She had no idea that I, Michael Thorne, had spent 20 years building a logistics and acquisitions empire. I didn't just understand contracts and supply chains, I commanded them. She thought her power came from an HOA binder. My power came from buying things, companies, assets, opportunities, and in that instant, a new acquisition target appeared on my radar. She had a contract with Talon Towing. I was about to execute a hostile takeover. She had towed my son's truck. I was going to buy her tow company. I'm glad you're here to witness this. If you appreciate a story where bullies get their comeuppance, do me a favor. Give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story of righteous revenge travels. Mrs. Davenport, or Eleanor as she insisted on being called, was the kind of person who seemed to be genetically engineered to run an HOA. She was a widow with too much time on her hands and a deep-seated belief that the world would be a better place if everyone just followed her rules. She walked the neighborhood with a clipboard and a measuring tape, documenting overgrown hedges and improperly colored mailboxes. She was a petty tyrant who drew her life's meaning from the small measure of power her position afforded her. Our families had a history of low-grade friction. I had been warned by the board for building a treehouse for my kids that was 6 inches too tall. She had filed a formal complaint when our golden retriever, Buddy, had barked at a squirrel during her afternoon nap. We tolerated her because we had to. But this was different. This was a targeted, cruel attack on my child. After a tense, circular argument on the curb, I realized reasoning with her was pointless. She was basking in the drama. My first priority was my son. His birthday party was supposed to start in 30 minutes. His friends were about to arrive, and his prized gift was sitting in an impound lot. "All right, that's enough," I said, cutting her off mid-sentence. I put a reassuring hand on Leo's shoulder. "Don't worry, son. We'll get it back. Let's go." I drove us to the address listed on the sign at the entrance of our subdivision, Talon Towing and Recovery. It was on the industrial outskirts of town, a grimy, chain-link fenced lot filled with cars that all seemed to be radiating an aura of misfortune. The office was a small, cinder-block building with barred windows. Inside, a bored-looking man sat behind a plexiglass barrier, chewing on a toothpick. The air smelled of stale coffee and regret. I explained the situation, and he grunted, tapping on a keyboard. "Yep, got it right here. 88 Bronco, from Willow Creek," he said. "That'll be $450. $450? I exclaimed. "For what? It was only there for an hour and a half." He shrugged, pointing to a sign on the wall. It listed a dizzying array of fees: the hookup fee, the mileage fee, the administrative processing fee, and the after-hours release fee, even though it was only 5 o'clock. It was legalized extortion. "And it's cash only," he added, a smug little smile playing on his lips. I was furious, but I was trapped. I paid the exorbitant fee in cash from a nearby ATM. As we were walking out to the lot to retrieve the Bronco, a thought struck me. "Who owns this place?" I asked the man. He looked at me, surprised by the question. Some guy named Marcus Thorne," he said. "Why?" "No reason," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. I had a name, Marcus Thorne, the owner of Talon Towing, the man who was an unknowing business partner in Mrs. Davenport's reign of terror. We got the Bronco back. We made it home just as Leo's friends were arriving. We tried to salvage the evening. We grilled burgers, we cut the cake, and Leo put on a brave face. But the magic of the day was gone. Every time he looked out the window at the Bronco, now safely in our driveway, I could see the shadow of the afternoon's humiliation in his eyes. He would get in the truck, and instead of remembering the joy of me handing him the keys, he would remember the shame of standing on an empty curb. That was something I could not forgive. After the party was over and the house was quiet, I went to my office. I poured myself a glass of scotch and sat down at my desk. The time for anger was over. It was time for action. I opened my laptop and began a deep dive into Talon Towing and its owner, Marcus Thorne. My company had a corporate subscription to several powerful business intelligence databases. I could pull up public records, corporate filings, liens, and financial histories on almost any company in the country. I typed in Talon Towing LLC. The results began to paint a picture. The company was a sole proprietorship, owned by one Marcus Thorne. It had been in business for 15 years and held contracts with a dozen HOAs and several commercial properties in the city. They had a fleet of 5 trucks, but as I dug deeper, I found signs of trouble. There were 3 active lawsuits against them for predatory towing practices. There was a significant lien from the IRS for unpaid payroll taxes, and the company's credit rating was abysmal. Marcus Thorne was struggling. He was over-leveraged and likely desperate. His aggressive contract with our HOA, which probably gave him a high volume of tows, was likely a crucial lifeline for his failing business. Next, I did a personal background check on Marcus. I found his home address, his property records. He had a large mortgage on his house and 2 car loans. He wasn't a kingpin, he was a small business owner drowning in debt. And a drowning man is often willing to grab any hand that's offered to him, even if he doesn't know who the hand is attached to. My plan began to crystallize. I wasn't just going to sue him or complain to the Better Business Bureau. That was thinking too small. That was Mrs. Davenport's level. I was going to remove him from the equation entirely. I was going to buy his company, lock, stock, and tow hook, but I couldn't approach him as Michael Thorne, the angry father from Willow Creek. He would see it as a shakedown, and the price would skyrocket, or he'd refuse to sell out of pride. I needed a cutout, an intermediary. I needed to create a completely anonymous professional acquisition offer that seemed like a stroke of good fortune for him, not a targeted attack. I spent the rest of the night setting up a new shell corporation, Apex Logistics Solutions, a generic, unimpeachable name. I used a registered agent service in another state to keep my name off the public filings. I set up a new website, a new phone number, and a new email address. By dawn, Apex Logistics Solutions existed, a ghost company with a professional sheen, ready to make a very serious offer. My target was identified. My corporate weapon was forged. The hunt was about to begin. The first rule of a successful acquisition is to know your target's pressure points. My initial research showed that Marcus Thorne was financially distressed, but I needed to know more. I needed to understand his operations, his vulnerabilities, and his mindset. For that, I needed on-the-ground intelligence. I hired a private investigator, a discreet and highly effective man named Kessler, whom I had used in the past for corporate due diligence. I didn't tell him why I was interested in Talon Towing. I simply tasked him with a full workup on the business and its owner. I wanted to know everything: his daily routine, his business's cash flow problems, any personal vices or weaknesses. While Kessler began his surveillance, I started the second phase of my plan, applying financial pressure. Talon Towing held the exclusive contract for our Willow Creek HOA. This contract was a significant and steady source of their revenue, built on the suffering of residents like my son. It was time to disrupt that revenue stream. I went to the next HOA board meeting. I didn't go in angry. I went in as a concerned homeowner and a logistics expert. Mrs. Davenport was there, looking smug and self-satisfied. She gave me a tight, condescending smile as I approached the podium during the open forum. "Good evening," I began, my voice calm and professional. "My name is Michael Thorne, and I live at 182 Blossom Lane. I'm here tonight to discuss the community's contract with our designated towing provider, Talon Towing." I saw a flicker of panic in Mrs. Davenport's eyes. This was her domain. "As some of you may know," I continued, "my son's vehicle was recently towed from a designated guest spot. While the timing was unfortunate, my issue today is not with that specific incident, but with the predatory and potentially brand-damaging nature of our vendor's fee structure." I laid out the facts. I presented the $450 bill for a non-consensual tow of less than 5 miles. I broke down the exorbitant, borderline fraudulent fees. "As a community," I said, "we have a responsibility to ensure that our contracted vendors operate ethically. The fee schedule of Talon Towing is not just unethical, it is predatory. It reflects poorly on us. It makes our HOA look less like a community association and more like a partner in a shakedown operation." I could see the other board members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. They were mostly reasonable people who had been bulldozed by Mrs. Davenport's aggressive personality. "I have done some research," I went on, pulling out a folder. "I have quotes from 3 other local towing companies. All of them have a more transparent and reasonable fee structure. For example, Reliable Towing charges a flat rate of $150 for an HOA tow, with no hidden administrative fees." I handed copies of the quotes to the board. "I am formally proposing that the board open the towing contract for competitive bidding. Continuing our exclusive relationship with a vendor that engages in such predatory practices is a financial and reputational liability for our entire community." Mrs. Davenport was practically vibrating with fury. "Talon Towing has been a reliable partner for years," she sputtered. "They are responsive and they know our rules. They are reliable at overcharging our residents," I countered smoothly. "My proposal is simply to explore our options to ensure we have a partner that is both effective and ethical. To not do so would be a dereliction of the board's fiduciary duty." The seed of doubt was planted. I had framed the issue not as a personal grievance, but as a matter of financial responsibility and community ethics. The other board members, worried about their own liability, agreed to put the matter on the agenda for the next meeting. Mrs. Davenport was outvoted. It was a small victory, but a crucial one. I had fired the first shot in a battle to sever Talon Towing's primary financial lifeline. A week later, Kessler delivered his report, and it was pure gold. He confirmed that Talon Towing was in dire straits. Their primary truck had a failing transmission, and Marcus couldn't afford the repairs. He was behind on payments to his suppliers. But the most valuable piece of intelligence was personal. Marcus Thorne had a passion. He was a dedicated amateur restorer of vintage motorcycles. He had a garage full of half-finished projects, and his dream was to one day open a high-end restoration shop. He saw towing as a dirty, dead-end job, a means to an end that he could never quite reach. His business wasn't just his livelihood. It was the anchor weighing down his dream. Now I had it. His financial pressure point and his emotional one. I knew exactly how to structure the offer. Through my shell corporation, Apex Logistics Solutions, I had a corporate attorney draft a formal, unsolicited letter of intent. It was a work of art. The letter began by stating that Apex was a growing logistics firm looking to expand its regional footprint by acquiring smaller, established local operators. It praised Talon Towing's long-standing community contracts and market persistence. Then came the offer. We offered to buy the entire business, the name, the client list, the fleet of mostly aging trucks, and the property lease, for a single, all-cash payment of $300,000. For a healthy business, it would have been a lowball offer. But for a business on the brink of collapse, it was a lifeline. It was enough for Marcus to clear his debts, pay his IRS lien, and walk away with a substantial nest egg. But here was the masterstroke, the part that targeted his emotional core. The offer contained a specific carve-out clause. It stated that the acquisition was for the commercial towing assets only. The seller, Mr. Thorne, would be allowed to retain full ownership of all non-commercial vehicle restoration equipment and any personal motorcycle projects currently housed at the property. We would even provide, at our expense, a moving service to transport these personal items to a location of his choice. I was offering him not just money, but his dream. I was offering him a clean break from the business he hated and the freedom to pursue the one he loved. It was an offer I knew he wouldn't be able to refuse. We sent the letter via a registered courier. Now all I could do was wait. I had applied pressure to his revenue, and I had presented him with the perfect escape hatch. I had baited the trap with everything a desperate man could want. All he had to do was walk into it. The fate of Mrs. Davenport's favorite towing company was now in the hands of a man who had no idea he was a pawn in a much larger game. The silence after sending the offer was the most nerve-wracking part of the entire operation. For 3 days, I heard nothing. I found myself checking the anonymous email inbox for Apex Logistics Solutions every 10 minutes, a knot of anticipation tightening in my gut. Had I miscalculated? Had Marcus Thorne found a last-minute investor, or was his pride stronger than his desperation? My entire plan hinged on his response. The email arrived on a Thursday morning. It was from Marcus, sent from a generic personal email address. It was short, cautious, but pulsing with interest. To whom it may concern, it read, I am in receipt of your letter of intent regarding Talon Towing. I am willing to discuss the terms of your proposal. Please let me know who I will be speaking with. The fish had taken the bait. I passed the communication over to a trusted member of my executive team, a man named David Chen, who headed my company's mergers and acquisitions department. David was sharp, discreet, and had a poker face forged in 100 high-stakes negotiations. He would be the public face of Apex Logistics Solutions. He knew nothing of my personal motivations. To him, this was just another small, strategic acquisition. His professional distance was the perfect shield. David, acting as the vice president of development for Apex, responded and set up a call. I sat in my office, listening in on speakerphone, a silent ghost in the machine. Marcus Thorne's voice was gravelly, worn down by years of stress. He was trying to sound like a tough, seasoned business owner, but the underlying anxiety was palpable. So, Apex Logistics, Marcus began. Never heard of you. We prefer to keep a low profile, David replied smoothly, his voice the epitome of corporate calm. We're a private equity group specializing in logistics infrastructure. We see potential in the local market. Your company, Mr. Thorne, has established contracts and a recognized name. We see that as a turnkey asset. The price you're offering, it's a bit light, Marcus blustered. a weak attempt at negotiation. It's a fair valuation based on your current assets, liabilities, and the market conditions, David said, leaving the unspoken words, your IRS lien, your failing equipment, your pending lawsuits, hanging in the air between them. And as you know, it is an all-cash offer. We can close in less than 30 days. No financing contingencies, just a clean, simple transaction that leaves you free and clear. Then David delivered the line I had coached him on, the one aimed directly at Marcus's heart. We understand your passion lies in vehicle restoration. Our goal is to acquire and grow the towing operation. We have no interest in your personal projects. We see this as an opportunity for you to capitalize on your hard work and transition to a new chapter, fully funded. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in Marcus's head, the weight of his debts on one side, the vision of a sunlit garage filled with vintage motorcycles on the other. "Send me the purchase agreement," Marcus said, his voice thick with a mixture of defeat and relief. The next few weeks were a blur of legal and financial paperwork. David handled the negotiations. I reviewed every document in the background. We conducted our due diligence, a process that was largely for show since I already knew everything about the company's precarious financial state. We made it look professional and thorough, a standard acquisition, never betraying the fact that the entire transaction was a surgical strike with a single target. The day of the closing, I was a ghost once again. The signing took place at a downtown title office. I was parked across the street in my car, watching through the large glass window. I saw Marcus Thorne walk in, his shoulders slumped, looking like a man walking to his own execution. I saw my man, David Chen, greet him with a firm, professional handshake. I watched as they signed the stack of documents that officially transferred ownership of Talon Towing LLC, its assets, its contracts, and its name, to my anonymous shell corporation. When Marcus walked out, he looked different. The weight of the world seemed to have lifted from him. He was a man who had just been freed from a 15-year prison sentence. He had a check in his pocket that would solve all his problems and fund his dream. He had no idea that he had just handed the keys to his kingdom and the instrument of my revenge over to the father of the boy whose birthday he had helped ruin. I waited until he drove away. Then I went into the office. David handed me a folder containing my copy of the signed documents and a set of keys. "Congratulations, Michael," he said. "Apex Logistics Solutions is now the proud owner of a small and, frankly, rather dilapidated towing company." "Excellent work, David," I said, a cold smile on my face. I held the keys in my hand. They were the keys to every truck, every office, every gate in the Talon Towing empire. They were the keys to Mrs. Davenport's undoing. Phase 1 was complete. I had acquired the weapon. Now it was time to re-aim it. My first act as the new, invisible owner of Talon Towing was to make some changes. I drove to the grimy lot on the edge of town. The same bored employee was sitting behind the plexiglass. He looked up, annoyed, as I walked in. "Can I help you?" he grunted. "You can," I said, walking around the barrier and into the office. "My name is Michael Thorne. I own this place now." The man's jaw dropped. I spent the next hour explaining the New World Order. His name was Rick. He wasn't a bad guy, just a man beaten down by a bad boss and a thankless job. I told him his job was secure, but that our business model was changing. "Effective immediately," I announced, "we are implementing a community-first towing policy. Our new fee structure for HOA tows will be a flat, all-inclusive $150. No more predatory administrative fees. We are a service provider, not an extortion racket. Furthermore, we will no longer accept anonymous tow requests. Every tow request must be submitted in writing by a verified HOA board member, with a photograph of the violation attached." Rick looked at me like I had grown a second head. "You're going to lose a ton of money," he said. "We're going to gain a better reputation," I countered. "And one more thing. I want you to pull the service history for truck number 3, the oldest one in the fleet, the one with the bad transmission. I had a special plan for that truck." The next day, I turned my attention to the Willow Creek HOA. As the owner of their contracted vendor, I had every right to communicate with them. I drafted a formal letter to the board of directors, with a special copy sent via registered mail to the personal address of one Mrs. Eleanor Davenport. "Dear Willow Creek HOA Board," the letter began. My name is Michael Thorne, and I am the new owner of Talon Towing. I am writing to inform you of some exciting changes to our operational policies. In an effort to better serve the communities we partner with, we have overhauled our fee structure to be more transparent and resident-friendly. I laid out the new, lower fees. Then I got to the heart of the matter. Furthermore, to ensure accuracy and accountability, all tow requests must now be submitted through our new online portal. This will require the requesting board member to log in, provide their name, and upload photographic evidence of the violation with a clear timestamp. This new policy will protect the community, the board, and our company from any potential disputes or claims of improper towing. I was, under the guise of professionalism, completely dismantling Mrs. Davenport's anonymous system of terror. She could no longer just make a phone call. She would now have to create a digital paper trail attaching her own name to every single tow she ordered. I had removed her cloak of anonymity. I could only imagine her face as she read that letter, the realization dawning on her that her favorite weapon had been neutered. But I was just getting started. The final, most beautiful part of my plan was about to be set in motion, and it all revolved around that old, broken-down tow truck with the bad transmission. The new policies at Talon Towing sent a quiet but seismic shockwave through the Willow Creek HOA. Mrs. Davenport, stripped of her ability to order anonymous tows with a simple phone call, was effectively disarmed. The number of tows from our neighborhood dropped from an average of 10 per week to 0. The reign of the clipboard tyrant had been brought to a screeching halt by the simple mechanism of accountability. She could no longer terrorize residents without attaching her name to the act, and that was a risk even she was unwilling to take. For a few weeks, a blessed peace settled over the community. My son, Leo, was enjoying his Bronco, driving it to school with a pride that was no longer tainted by the memory of its brief impoundment. My victory was, for all intents and purposes, complete. I had achieved my primary objective, but I had not yet achieved my secondary objective: to deliver a personal, unforgettable lesson in humility to Mrs. Davenport. The final act of my play was yet to be staged. I had spent a small fortune on truck number 3, the old, dilapidated tow truck with the failing transmission. I didn't just have the transmission replaced. I had the entire truck meticulously restored. The engine was rebuilt. The rusty body was sanded down and given a new coat of paint, the exact same shade of midnight blue as my son's Bronco. The worn-out Talon Towing logo was replaced with a new custom one. The truck was no longer a part of a commercial fleet. It was now my personal property. My plan was set for the annual Willow Creek Community Picnic, the social event of the year, a day of forced fun and neighborhood gossip, and, most importantly, Mrs. Davenport's personal Super Bowl. She was the head of the organizing committee, a role she relished, allowing her to march around with a megaphone, directing traffic and judging the quality of everyone's potato salad. It was the peak of her power, the day she was most visible and most self-important. The picnic was held at the community park, which had a notoriously small parking lot. Overflow parking was permitted along one side of the main residential street, a street that ran directly in front of Mrs. Davenport's meticulously landscaped house. The morning of the picnic, my son and I drove the newly restored midnight blue tow truck into the neighborhood. We arrived early, before the crowds, and we parked it directly in front of Mrs. Davenport's house, in a perfectly legal, designated overflow spot. But this was no ordinary tow truck. I had a custom fabrication shop create a large, professional-looking sign, which was now mounted on the flatbed. It was designed to look like a mobile billboard. The sign read, in large, friendly letters, "Brought to you by the new community-friendly Talon Towing. Got an HOA problem? We believe in communication before confiscation." This truck is a reminder of our commitment to fair and transparent service for the residents of Willow Creek. Enjoy the picnic. Underneath the text was the company's new lower fee schedule, prominently displayed. It was a masterpiece of passive aggression. It was a monument to her defeat, parked on her own front lawn, on her most important day of the year. It was a giant, gleaming billboard advertising the very company she once controlled, now operating under a philosophy that was the polar opposite of her own. We parked the truck, locked it, and walked to the park. The effect was immediate and glorious. As residents began to arrive, they were all greeted by the sight of the truck. They would slow down, read the sign, and a slow smile would spread across their faces. People who had been fined or towed by her in the past understood the message instantly. It was a public declaration of a new era. I saw Mrs. Davenport when she first emerged from her house. She stopped dead in her tracks, her face turning a shade of pale white, then a blotchy, furious red. She stared at the truck as if it were a spaceship that had landed on her lawn. Her eyes darted around, seeing her neighbors reading the sign and whispering to each other. She was the center of attention, but not in the way she had planned. She marched over to me at the park, her face a thundercloud. "What is the meaning of this, Michael?" she hissed, keeping her voice low to avoid making a scene. "You cannot park a commercial vehicle on a residential street." "Oh, but I can, Eleanor," I said, taking a calm sip of my lemonade. I checked the bylaws very carefully. Section 8, subsection C. Commercial vehicles are permitted for up to 12 hours during special community events for advertising purposes, with the approval of the event organizer. And since you are the event organizer, I just assumed you'd approve. She stared at me, speechless. I had used her own rules, the very ones she worshipped, to tie her hands completely. Besides, I continued, it's not even a commercial vehicle anymore. I had it re-registered. It's my personal recreational truck now. I'm a hobbyist. I gave her a wink. Her entire day, her moment of glory, was ruined. Every time she looked out at the crowd, she saw them glancing over at the truck, then back at her, their expressions a mixture of amusement and pity. The truck was a silent, powerful testament to her fall from grace. It told a story without me having to say a word. It told everyone that the reign of the anonymous tow request was over. It told them that the tyrant of Willow Creek had been overthrown. Late in the afternoon, as the picnic was winding down, I saw Leo standing by the truck, talking to a group of his friends. They were all admiring it. He wasn't looking at it with any lingering sadness. He was looking at it with a smile. A real one. He understood what I had done. I hadn't just gotten his truck back. I had dismantled the entire system of petty tyranny that had caused him pain. I had bought the bully's favorite weapon and turned it into a parade float for her own public humiliation. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, I walked over to the truck to drive it home. I saw a small piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper. It wasn't a ticket. It was a note, scrawled on a napkin in messy handwriting. It said, "Thank you." It wasn't signed, but I knew who it was from. It was from every resident who had ever been unfairly fined, every family who had been harassed over the color of their mailbox, every person who had felt powerless against her petty reign. My $450 problem had been solved, and the solution had been the most satisfying acquisition of my entire career. The community picnic marked a fundamental shift in the power dynamics of Willow Creek. The midnight blue tow truck, my monument to her defeat, had done more than just humiliate Mrs. Davenport. It had emboldened the residents. For years, they had lived under the quiet oppression of her rule, too afraid to speak up for fear of becoming her next target. My very public and very creative counterattack had shown them that she was not invincible. The emperor, or in this case, the empress, had no clothes. In the weeks that followed, a quiet rebellion began to brew. It started small. Mr. Henderson, whose prize-winning roses had once been cited for growing an inch over the regulation height, defiantly planted a new, vibrant row of sunflowers that brazenly ignored all height restrictions. The Miller family, previously fined for leaving their son's bicycle on the lawn overnight, hosted a weekend-long garage sale, a clear, if temporary, violation of the rules against on-property commercial activity. No one called to report them. The fear that had held the neighborhood in its grip was evaporating, replaced by a heady sense of liberation. Mrs. Davenport was spiraling. Her primary weapon, the anonymous tow, had been taken from her. Her authority was being openly mocked. She was a queen without a kingdom, a tyrant without anyone left to tyrannize. She tried to cling to power, sending out a flurry of warning letters for minor infractions, a slightly ajar garbage can lid, a holiday decoration left up a day too late. But her threats were now toothless. Everyone knew that without the tow truck as her ultimate enforcer, Her warnings were just angry words on paper. She became a recluse, rarely seen on her usual clipboard-wielding patrols. Her perfect lawn began to look a little less perfect. Her sense of order, which she had tried to impose on the entire neighborhood, was crumbling even in her own domain. My company, the new Talon Towing, was undergoing its own transformation. I had no interest in running a tow company, but I had a deep-seated hatred for inefficiency and bad business practices. I saw it as a challenge. I promoted Rick, the formerly board office manager, to general manager, giving him a significant raise and a share of the profits. I empowered him to run the company under its new community-first philosophy. We invested in new, state-of-the-art trucks. We created a user-friendly website for scheduling and payments. We redesigned the fee structure to be the most transparent and competitive in the city. We started winning contracts not just with other HOAs, but with reputable local businesses who were impressed by our professionalism. Talon Towing, once a symbol of predatory capitalism, was slowly becoming a model of ethical service. It was becoming profitable, not by exploiting people, but by treating them fairly. It was a fascinating case study and a source of quiet, immense satisfaction. The real test, however, came at the annual HOA board election. For the past 5 years, Mrs. Davenport had run unopposed. This year, to no one's surprise, Mr. Henderson announced his candidacy for president of the board. His platform was simple: common sense and community spirit. He promised to review and revise the bylaws to eliminate petty and vindictive rules and to ensure that the HOA served the residents, not the other way around. Mrs. Davenport, in a last, desperate attempt to cling to relevance, ran for re-election. She campaigned on a platform of protecting our property values and upholding our standards. She went door to door, trying to rally her old base of support, but she found that the ground had shifted beneath her feet. People were no longer afraid of her. They would listen politely, then place a "Henderson for President" sign on their lawn as soon as she was out of sight. The election was held at the community clubhouse. The turnout was the largest in Willow Creek history. The final vote count wasn't even close. Mr. Henderson won with over 80% of the vote. It was a complete and total repudiation of Mrs. Davenport's reign. She sat in the back of the room, her face pale as the results were read. She had lost her power, her authority, and now her title. She was, for the first time in a decade, just a resident. I thought that would be the end of it. I had won. My son was happy. The neighborhood was free. Talon Towing was a thriving, ethical business. But Mrs. Davenport had one last, desperate card to play. It was a move born not of strategy, but of pure, unadulterated spite. It was an attack aimed not at me, but at the one thing I had left that was vulnerable: my business reputation. A month after the election, I received a call from Rick at Talon Towing. His voice was tense. "Michael, you need to see this. There's an article in the online edition of the local paper. It's about us." I pulled up the article. The headline was a gut punch. "Local logistics mogul's ethical towing company hides a history of predatory practices." The article, written by a freelance journalist known for his sensationalist style, was a masterpiece of innuendo and half-truths. It detailed the dark history of Talon Towing, citing the numerous lawsuits and complaints filed against the company under its previous owner, Marcus Thorne. It painted a picture of a predatory enterprise that had terrorized communities for years. And then came the poison dart. The article quoted an anonymous concerned resident of Willow Creek who suggested that the company's recent change in ownership and philosophy was nothing more than a clever marketing ploy. The quote was dripping with malice. "A leopard doesn't change its spots," the anonymous source said. "A company with a soul that rotten can't be fixed by a new logo and a fancy website. It's the same old predatory business, just with a new, powerful owner trying to whitewash its crimes." I didn't need to guess who the anonymous source was. It was Eleanor Davenport. She had been defeated at home, so she had taken the fight public. She couldn't hurt me in the neighborhood, so she was trying to hurt me in the marketplace. She was trying to poison my new ethical brand by tying it to the sins of its past. She was attacking my integrity, the one thing I valued more than anything else. My first reaction was cold fury. My second was a familiar, calculated calm. She thought she was being clever, using the anonymity of a press source. She thought she had found a way to wound me where I couldn't prove her involvement. She was wrong. She had forgotten who I was. I was a man who owned a logistics and acquisitions firm. And one of the services we offered our highest-paying corporate clients was state-of-the-art digital forensics and opposition research. She had whispered her poison from the shadows. I was about to turn on a floodlight so bright it would burn those shadows away to nothing. She had tried to attack my reputation. I was about to show her what a real, professional, and utterly devastating reputational attack looked like. The first rule of modern warfare, corporate or otherwise, is that there is no such thing as true anonymity. Every digital whisper leaves a footprint. Mrs. Davenport, in her hubris, believed her anonymous source status was a shield. For me, it was merely a puzzle to be solved. I tasked the best digital forensics expert in my company, a brilliant young woman named Anya, with a single objective: to trace the source of the leak to the journalist. I didn't tell her the backstory. I simply framed it as a case of corporate espionage. A disgruntled former associate is attempting to damage our new asset by leaking historical data, I explained. I need to know who it was. Anya was a digital bloodhound. It took her less than 48 hours. By analyzing the journalist's professional network, social media activity, and the metadata of his recent online communications, she found the link. The journalist had a cousin who worked as a real estate agent. That real estate agent had recently been a guest at a dinner party, and the host of that dinner party was none other than Mrs. Eleanor Davenport. Anya even managed to uncover an email chain where the journalist's cousin made the introduction, saying, "My friend Eleanor has a very interesting story you might want to hear about a local towing company." The evidence was circumstantial, but it was a clear and undeniable chain of connection. I now had the proof I needed, but simply exposing her as the source felt too small, too reactive. I didn't just want to defend. I wanted to end the game permanently. To do that, I needed to understand her deepest vulnerability. I knew it wasn't financial. She was a wealthy widow. Her vulnerability was her reputation, her social standing, the carefully crafted image of herself as a community pillar and a guardian of integrity. That was the foundation of her entire identity, and I was about to dynamite it. I shifted Anya's focus from digital forensics to deep background research. "I want to know everything about Eleanor Davenport," I said. "Public records, property deeds, past legal disputes, the source of her late husband's wealth, everything." What Anya found was far more damning than I ever could have imagined. Mr. Davenport had been a commercial real estate developer. On the surface, his career was a story of success. But when Anya dug into the archives of old city permits and zoning variance requests, a pattern of corruption emerged. Mr. Davenport had a habit of buying up undervalued residential properties, then using a network of political connections to get them rezoned for lucrative commercial use, often against the fierce opposition of local residents. The crown jewel of her findings was a massive file from a 20-year-old legal battle. Mr. Davenport had bought a small, historic apartment building, promising the elderly, low-income tenants he would maintain it as affordable housing. The moment the deal closed, he used a series of aggressive, borderline illegal tactics to drive them out, cutting off services, fabricating lease violations, and using a notoriously predatory management company. Once the building was empty, he had it rezoned and demolished it to build a strip mall. The tenants, represented by a legal aid society, had sued him. They lost, but the court records were filled with heartbreaking depositions detailing his cruelty and greed. And who was listed as the vice president of Davenport Development, the person who signed the eviction notices and managed the campaign to oust the elderly tenants? His wife, Eleanor Davenport. This wasn't just a story about a corrupt developer. This was her story. Her entire fortune, the very foundation of her comfortable life in Willow Creek, was built on the suffering of displaced, low-income seniors. The woman who obsessively enforced HOA rules about the color of mailboxes had a past steeped in real, profound human misery. The guardian of community standards had built her mansion on the rubble of another community she had personally helped to destroy. This was the ultimate weapon. It was the truth. I compiled everything into a pristine, meticulously organized file. The evidence of her being the anonymous source, the court records from the tenant lawsuit, the sworn depositions of the people she had helped make homeless, and the city records of her husband's corrupt rezoning deals. I called it the Davenport File. My next move was not to leak it to the press. That was her tactic, not mine. My approach would be more direct, more personal, and far more devastating. I sent a simple, one-sentence email to her from my personal account. Eleanor, it read, I think you and I need to have a conversation about your family's history in commercial real estate development. My office. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., I suggest you come alone. The next morning, she arrived at my corporate headquarters. She walked into my office, her face a mask of anxious defiance. She was trying to project strength, but her eyes betrayed a deep, gnawing fear. She didn't know what I had, but she knew it was serious. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I gestured to the chair opposite my desk. On the desk between us was the file. You've been busy, I said, my voice calm and cold, speaking to reporters, trying to tarnish my company's reputation. It was a clumsy move, Eleanor. Very sloppy. I have no idea what you're talking about, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Don't you? I opened the file and slid the first document across the desk to her. It was the email chain from the journalist's cousin. Her face went pale. Now that we've established that, I said, let's talk about something more interesting. I slid the next document across. It was a copy of an eviction notice for an 80-year-old woman named Clara Bellwether, and at the bottom, in crisp, clear ink, was the signature of Eleanor Davenport. I watched her as the blood drained from her face. She looked down at her own signature from 20 years ago, and in that moment, the entire artifice of her life crumbled. The righteous HOA president, the pillar of the community, was gone. All that was left was the woman who had signed the paper that threw an old woman out of her home. The past is a funny thing, isn't it? I said quietly. It never really goes away, and it's about to become very, very public. I've prepared a comprehensive story for the press. Not a series of anonymous whispers, but a fully documented exposé, complete with court records and interviews with some of the surviving tenants. The story of how the Davenport fortune was really made. It's a hell of a story. She stared at me, her eyes wide with sheer terror. You wouldn't, she whispered. Wouldn't I? I leaned forward. You attacked my son. You attacked my business. You attacked my integrity. You did it maliciously and without provocation. You seem to believe that you can act without consequences. I am here to tell you that your life of consequence-free cruelty is over. So here is my offer. It's very simple. You are going to sell your house, and you are going to leave Willow Creek. You will be gone within 90 days. You will disappear from this community, and you will never, ever interfere in my life or my business again. If you do this, the Davenport file remains right here, on this desk. If you refuse, or if I ever hear your name in a negative context again, this file goes to every major news outlet in the state. I had her. Her deepest, darkest secret, the rotten foundation upon which her entire life was built, was now in my hands. All her petty rules and regulations, all her clipboard-wielding power, it all amounted to nothing in the face of this one ugly truth. You have 24 hours to decide, I said, standing up to signal the end of the meeting. I think you'll make the right choice. She stumbled out of my office, a broken woman. The war was over, and this time there would be no question about who had won. The 24 hours I gave Mrs. Davenport were a mere formality. We both knew there was no choice to be made. Her entire identity was built on the perception of her neighbors, on the illusion of her as a righteous, upstanding pillar of the community. The public exposure of her past would not just be embarrassing. It would be an annihilation of her very sense of self. It was a threat she could not possibly withstand. The call came not from her, but from her lawyer, a man whose voice was heavy with the weariness of managing a client who had been completely outplayed. He called Ben Carter, my attorney, late the next afternoon. Mr. Thorne's terms are aggressive, he said, a massive understatement. My client feels they are commensurate with the provocations, Ben replied coolly. Understood, the lawyer sighed. My client will comply. We will need the full 90 days to arrange for the sale of the property and her relocation. That is acceptable, Ben said. Please be advised that the terms of the agreement are absolute. Any deviation, any further contact with my client or his family, any anonymous whispers to the press, and the file will be released. The truce is conditional on her complete and total disappearance from Willow Creek. And just like that, it was done. There was no negotiation, no further argument. I had placed her in a checkmate position so absolute that the only move left on the board was to tip over her own king. The for sale sign that appeared on her lawn a week later was a quiet final confirmation of my victory. It was a discreet, elegant sign from a high-end real estate agency, but to the residents of Willow Creek, it was as loud and clear as a cannon blast. It was a flag of surrender. The news spread through the neighborhood in a wave of hushed, excited phone calls and text messages. No one knew the details of my final confrontation with her, and I intended to keep it that way. The Davenport file was a weapon of last resort, and its power lay in its secrecy. As far as the community was concerned, Eleanor Davenport had simply been defeated by the collective will of the residents and had decided to move on. They didn't need to know the ugly truth of her past. They just needed to be free of her oppressive presence. The sale of her house was swift. In a desirable neighborhood like ours, a well-maintained property like hers was snapped up in a matter of weeks. I watched the process from a distance, a silent observer to the dismantling of her reign. I saw the moving trucks arrive, large and impersonal, packing up the life she had so carefully constructed. On the final day, just before the new owners were scheduled to take possession, I was in my garage, tinkering with the engine of the old Bronco with Leo. It had become our favorite pastime, a way to connect and spend time together. I looked up and saw her car, a large black sedan, pull slowly out of her driveway for the last time. She didn't look at our house. She just stared straight ahead, her face a blank mask, and drove down the street, past the park where she once reigned, past the neighbors she once terrorized, and out of the gates of Willow Creek forever. She was a ghost, fading from a place she had once haunted. Leo looked up from the engine. "Is that her?" he asked quietly. "Yes, son," I said. "That's her." He watched the car disappear around the corner. "Are you happy?" I thought about his question for a long moment. Was I happy? Happy wasn't the right word. I felt a sense of profound, quiet satisfaction. I felt the relief of a battle won, of a threat neutralized. I had protected my son. I had liberated my community. I had taken a cruel, malicious act and turned it back on its perpetrator with a force and precision she never could have anticipated. "I'm content, Leo," I finally answered. "I'm content that a bully has learned that there are always consequences. And I'm happy that you can drive this truck without ever having to think about that day again." He smiled, a real, genuine smile. "Thanks, Dad," he said. And then he handed me a wrench. "Now can you help me with this alternator?" The world had been set right. The balance had been restored. And in the quiet, greasy piece of our garage, a father and son worked on an old truck. The simple, happy moment, a testament to the fact that the war was, at long last, truly over. With Mrs. Davenport's departure, a tangible sense of lightness settled over Willow Creek. It was as if the entire neighborhood collectively exhaled a breath it had been holding for years. Mr. Henderson proved to be a wonderful HOA president. He, along with the new board, undertook a complete review of the community bylaws. They systematically dismantled what they called the Eleanor Amendments. The dozens of petty, punitive rules she had added over the years. The rule about mailbox colors was abolished. The height restrictions for play equipment were relaxed. The process for architectural changes was streamlined and made collaborative rather than adversarial. The HOA was transformed from a weapon of oppression into a genuine tool for community betterment. They focused on things that mattered: improving the playground, organizing social events, and ensuring the common areas were safe and beautiful. My company, Talon Towing, became a case study in my own business school lectures on ethical turnarounds. Under Rick's management, it became the most respected and profitable towing service in the region. We even won a Local Business of the Year award from the Chamber of Commerce, an irony so delicious I had the plaque mounted in my office right next to a framed photo of the midnight blue tow truck from the picnic. One day, Rick called me with an interesting proposition. "Michael," he said, I just got a call from a guy named Marcus Thorne. He's the old owner. He's opened a high-end motorcycle restoration shop, and it's doing incredibly well. He wants to know who our fleet mechanic is. He says he was so impressed with the restoration work on old truck number 3 that he wants to send his high-value clients to the same shop. I laughed, a deep, genuine laugh. Give him the number, Rick. Tell him it's on the house. My revenge had been so complete that it had inadvertently helped the first person caught in the crossfire to achieve his dream. It was an unexpected but welcome outcome. As for my son, Leo, the Bronco became a legend among his friends. It was more than just a truck. It was a story of a birthday gift that was stolen and then returned, a story of a father who went to extraordinary lengths to right a wrong. It became a symbol of our family's resilience. Leo graduated from high school with honors and went off to college to study engineering, just like his old man. When he left, he parked the Bronco in the garage. "Keep her safe for me, Dad," he said, handing me the keys. Years passed. The memory of Mrs. Davenport faded into a local legend, a cautionary tale told by old-timers to new residents about the dark ages of the HOA. The new family who bought her house were lovely people with 3 young kids who filled the yard with laughter and an unapologetically bright pink plastic slide. One Saturday afternoon, I was in the garage, changing the oil in the Bronco for Leo, who was coming home for the holidays. The sun was streaming through the window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. The smell of oil and old metal filled the space. It was a peaceful, domestic scene. My wife, Sarah, came in, holding a letter. "This came for you," she said. It had no return address. I wiped my hands on a rag and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a newspaper clipping from a small coastal town several hundred miles away. It was an obituary. Eleanor Davenport had passed away at the age of 78. I read the short, generic paragraph. It mentioned her late husband, her dedication to community standards, and that she left no surviving children. There was no mention of Willow Creek. It was a life edited of its most significant chapter. I stood there in the quiet of my garage, holding the obituary. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel sadness. I felt a profound sense of finality. The last ghost of that battle had finally been laid to rest. I had never released the Davenport file. I had kept my word. I had destroyed her power, not her entire legacy. Her secrets, as promised, had died with her. I folded the clipping and put it in the tool chest. It was a final historical document from a closed case. I looked at the Bronco, gleaming under the garage lights, a perfect symbol of that long-ago birthday. The $450 tow had ended up costing millions in the purchase of a company, the restoration of a community spirit, and the quiet, permanent exile of a petty tyrant. I smiled. It was, without a doubt, the best money I had ever spent.